Good morning, home church. Hope you guys are doing well. We are continuing to hear exciting things about what's going on over there. And God's going to use it. I think what you guys are doing is really, frankly, it's the nuts and bolts of what church should be about. And so we're excited for you, even more so that we're a part of it. But I do want to jump right in this morning. We're going to finish up Galatians chapter 1, verses 10 through 24. One thing I want to note, just for your information, is that Galatians 1:10 through the end of chapter 2 is really the autobiography of Paul. He's taking us on the journey that he went through before when he was Saul, all the way through his conversion, through his time alone with God, to him going up to the church in Jerusalem to try to clarify some things. And you're going to see that this morning. But let's go ahead and get in there. There's two things that I really want you to see that I feel is important as we talk about this subject, grace. Number one, we see God working. God is working in the life of Paul. Verse 16 says to reveal his Son in me so that I could preach him among the Gentiles. God did not just save Paul for him just to be saved, to join him in heaven. God saved Paul because he wants us all to join him there, and we know not everybody will accept him. But that being said, when God saves us, he also has a purpose for us. And that purpose, whether we follow through on that purpose, whether we, serve God, that has nothing to do with our salvation. And we need to be clear on that, because works don't save you. It is strictly your faith in Jesus Christ. Now, if you're a believer and if you're in the Word and God is revealing himself to you, then he's going to reveal that purpose. And we automatically want to serve him because, look what he's done for us. We want to serve him because we love him. So we see God working in Paul, and the best explanation of this verse that I've ever heard, I want to read to you right now. It says, Paul is combining two experiences in one. On one hand, God obviously revealed Jesus to Paul on the road to Damascus. There he realized who Jesus was. He met Jesus on Jesus' terms, not his own. But secondly, Paul realized he was being called to show others who Jesus was. So we can say this, that God revealed Jesus Christ to Paul so that he could reveal Jesus through Paul. I think that's very important because, as we've talked about, grace is not something you just receive at salvation. The gospel is not something just for the non-believer. It's something that we take all through our life, and grace, salvation, the gospel, the method of salvation, is always working through our lives to make us more Christ-like, to make us in a way that God reveals himself to other people through us. One of the other things is we see Paul growing. Paul does not strike me as a man who frankly gives a rip about what anybody says about him. If you look at his past in the religious culture, he was out to be number one. It was about reputation. And he was going to force that reputation. He was not going to allow others to determine that on their own. But what we see here, what we see in this chapter, I think it's verse 17 and verse 18, we see Paul go to the church in Jerusalem. He's going to clarify some things, and he's doing this so he can honestly show them, hey, we are all on the same team. We are all trying to accomplish the same thing. The difference is my mission field is just different than yours. Yours is the Jewish community. Mine is the Gentiles. They're totally two different cultures. So we shouldn't be telling this culture over here that they need to do the same or observe the same traditions that we do because we have always done them, frankly. Those traditions have nothing to do with the gospel. They were just traditions that had been handed down generation after generation through the Israelites. And when you start adding to, like Paul said last week, when you start adding things to the gospel, then it's no longer the gospel. In a culture like the Gentiles, which frankly was multiple cultures, they're going to get confused. They're going to struggle because you're watering down, or you're making the message of the gospel different than it was intended. So Paul wanted to get there and show that they were on the same team, and more importantly, show that they were teaching the same thing. They were teaching the same gospel message. His message did not come from anybody but Jesus Christ himself. And I think that's really important that we look at that, because churches struggle. Churches internally and externally struggle to work together, because you put 5 or 10 people around a table, they're going to disagree on how things should be done. And that's okay. Somebody's going to have an idea. You're not going to like it. But what happens is what we do with that and how we move forward. Because there is no reason, if we are all focused on the gospel message, that all Christians, regardless of denomination, regardless of these man-made walls that we've put there, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to knock those down and reach our community with the gospel. Grace is constantly working in our lives, and that's the only way that happens. The only way to be unified is through the gospel. I do want to leave you with something that I feel that I need to share, and that is, a friend of mine recently made this statement to me. He doesn't have the pastor title, but he does preach. I believe he's a pastor. I believe he's called by God, and he does it in a marvelous way. God has used him in many ways. I got to hear him speak last weekend. But we were sitting around, and this is what he said to me, because he's a guy that has that Paul type story. He was doing a lot of things he shouldn't have been done. His dad was a pastor, so he knew the truth. Much like Paul had access to the scriptures when he was Saul. But it didn't resonate with him at that time. And frankly, this gentleman, got into drugs, he got into some things. The world really just had a grip on him. And it's one of those things where God saved him and changed him. But God has always, like Paul, like you, like me, God has always been taking grace and working grace in his life. And this is what he said. I don't dwell on my past. People will bring it up, but that was my past. Jesus is my future. And if he hasn't done anything else in my life since then, well, then I serve a God that is dead. Thankfully, he has. Thankfully, he is alive. And thankfully that my testimony is what he is doing in my life now. It doesn't change the salvation story that he has in his conversion. But what he is saying is grace is continually working in his life. So my time is spent. I've gone way over, but God bless, and we will talk to you next week.